And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. When I was asked to share this reflection for Aunt Tina's funeral, one of the first things I did after saying yes was to ask my mom if she knew where to find Aunt Tina's well-worn Bible. These words from John's Gospel were some amongst many she had underlined. And as I read this passage and many more underlined passages besides, this was the one that I kept coming back to time and time again. I remember seeing that Bible on visits to Aunt Tina's home over the years. Perhaps you do too. Perhaps when you visited her, whether in her apartment on Vine Street or later in Tabor Manor, you would have noticed it lying on a side table, constant companion, always within arm's reach. I remember so many visits over the years. I remember many of the visits when my brother and I were younger, driving midweek from Milton to St. Catharines with our mom, always stopping at Vine Floral, always picking out a bouquet, often carnations, to bring with us on our visit. They were always received with gratitude and, oh, you shouldn't have, before being placed prominently on display next to others she'd received from earlier visitors. As I took time dwelling in memories of Aunt Tina this week, I found myself thinking about that old Bible and wondering how often she'd been reading the words on those onion skin pages just moments before opening the door to welcome us in with a giant hug. See, for Aunt Tina, the Word of God, as she encountered it in the Scriptures and in the person of Jesus, was indeed a lamp unto her feet and a light unto her path. Which is to say that it is impossible for me to understand Aunt Tina's life apart from her deep faithfulness to Jesus and Jesus' deep faithfulness to her. What I learned from her, the gospel according to Aunt Tina, if you will, was not so much a lesson based in words or ideas, but rather a lesson in how we might seek to embody the good news of Jesus Christ in our day-to-day lives. It is perhaps no surprise that Aunt Tina also had these verses from Paul's letter to the Galatians underlined in her Bible. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Aunt Tina's life put her prayer and reading of Scripture into action. Her life bore this kind of fruit. And these small acts of faithfulness, as I experienced them year on year, they shaped me, they changed me, they encouraged me in my own life. And perhaps they affected you as well through her life. That was remarkable in its simplicity and steadfastness, its generosity and fierce self-giving love. What stories would we all tell if we were able to gather together after the service today? What stories would we tell of God's faithfulness to Tina, and through her to each of us and to the world? Earlier this week, my brother Jonathan wrote a beautiful, heartfelt reflection he shared on Facebook, and it moved me to tears. It also, as you might expect if you know John, got to something deeply true. So good at cutting to the heart of the matter. And he wrote in part, she lived a life of singlehood but was never alone. She traveled and had friends. She entertained and communicated freely. She was independent and strong, educated and compassionate. And she also gave the best hugs, and you knew she meant it. Almost as if with each hug she sought to hold the whole world in her arms. And this got me thinking about the ways in which the one who so often shied away from undue attention always found ways to bring us together. A never-expanding group of family at Christmas, sibling dinners, one-on-one lunches with individual family members and close friends. And of course, those family reunions where she stood at the center of this vast multitude, connected with each of us, living her life in deep community, rooted in Jesus, all the while practicing resurrection. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. What does it mean, I wonder, to practice resurrection? What does it mean to live the resurrected life in the midst of the world in which we find ourselves, a world of injustice and deep pain, a world of economic inequality and racism, a world of hatred and fear? What does it mean for us today to live as Easter people, as resurrection people in the face of death? And this year has brought us all in touch with grief, as if we hadn't known it before. Generalized grief for the untold millions who have died as a result of this pandemic. Deepening grief for those being killed by death-dealing systems that oppress. And this week, acutely and specifically, the grief we feel at the loss of our sister, our aunt, and our friend. Which brings us back to the story underlined in Aunt Tina's Bible. The story in which Jesus proclaims himself to be the resurrection and the life. The story in which Jesus' dear friend Lazarus grows terribly ill and his sisters Mary and Martha send word for him to come. Jesus stays too long where he is, arrives too late, and is chastised by Lazarus' grieving sisters who demand to know, what took you so long? We're not even under the travel restrictions of a provincial lockdown. And in the face of Lazarus' death, and in his family's deepest pain, they demand to know, where were you? Why weren't you here? And perhaps more importantly, what? What do we do now? In response, Jesus is troubled, overcome, and weeps. Sometimes we gloss over that bit too quickly. Jesus wept. And like the scars that were present on Jesus' body after his own resurrection, the tears don't simply go away. Where is Jesus? He doesn't skip over this part. He's in the midst of the hurt. He's right there with us in the midst of the present moment, dwelling in the pain of loss and the disorientation caused by a beloved friend's death. This week I found myself wondering what Aunt Tina would say to help us understand the comfort she took in these verses. How did she understand this promise of new life, the resurrection of the body and the life of the world to come? From the markings in her Bible, it is clear that she thought a lot about God's promise of redemption and new life, a new life she's currently experiencing. I don't know what she would have said, but here is something I do know. On many a Christmas Eve, for as far back as I can remember, Aunt Tina gathered our family. My mom and dad, my brother and me, along with Aunt Lydia and Uncle Ernie and my cousins in her apartment. And each year, as far back as I can remember, there came a moment when Aunt Tina would gather us around. Each year, she would invite us to rehearse the story of God's love, of Jesus, his haggard parents, and his miraculous birth. Crammed there in Aunt Tina's tiny apartment, too meticulously kept to be a stable, but small all the same, we would practice telling the story of the one who came to be amongst us, to live with us as one of us, to show us the downwardly mobile way of divine love, to invite us on that journey, and in so doing, to show us what God is like. I often think back on this annual tradition as one of the defining rituals of my childhood, not just because of the connection it brings me to Aunt Tina's life, but also because of the ways in which the story of God's faithfulness was passed on, told and retold over the years. As the family changed, as circumstances changed, so did the way we told the story. In the earliest days, the gathering was small. And yet, over time, as more members were added to the family, more people came to gather. Looking back with COVID eyes, I cannot fathom how we did what we did. So many people in a tiny apartment, sweat and spit everywhere. What of our safety bubbles? What of hand hygiene? What of keeping one another safe? There are snapshots in my mind of Christmases past. Ever expanding family gathered around the Bible in Aunt Tina's apartment. Some years, the story was read from her well marked, leather bound NIV. Others, it was read from a small board book or a computer printout. I still remember the year my younger cousins took turns reading parts, dramatizing the entire story so that we could enter more fully into the miracle of the incarnation, of God amongst us, light in the midst of us, bringing us to light and life. But that was then, and this is now. And gatherings look different now, and there's sadness in that. There's sadness, and yet there is also hope. You see, one of the things that I was taught in this family, and it has a lot to do with Aunt Tina, is the way in which the story of God's faithfulness is handed on. From person to person, from family to family, from generation to generation. Practiced, rehearsed, and embodied. Over the course of the years, we would take turns telling the story of God's immense love for creation. The story of the way God breaks into history in the most unlikely way. The birth of a vulnerable, squawking, needy baby. I think about that differently these days with two children of my own, how the story and the experience grows richer with different experiences and different perspectives of what it means for God to be born, to live, to die, and to rise to new life. Here, in this time and place, amongst us. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And so today we enter the story of Jesus once more, albeit from a different angle. This time, Jesus is not wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger, but present with us at his dear friend's graveside. And here in the tears, in the midst of pain and loss, he proclaims the impossible. New life, even on the other side of death. Resurrection and life not only on the last day, but here, now, in our midst, in the present moment. For what has happened in Jesus, the one the Apostle Paul describes as the firstborn of the new creation, is happening with and amongst us right here. The invitation that Jesus offers Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, the invitation Jesus extends to each of us, is to join him in practicing resurrection now, in this life. That is why we have a church, a community of people being transformed by Christ, dedicating their lives to practicing resurrection in each of our relationships. Where is such resurrection practiced? With the people in front of us, beside us, and around us. We don't have to travel to the ends of the earth to do this. We can live the resurrected life starting right here and right now. And isn't this what Aunt Tina did? She lived so that others might experience such love. She lived in a way that encouraged us to live more fully into God's dream for the entire cosmos. The miracle and the invitation of Jesus is this, that death does not have the final say. That though our mourning and grief may last for some time, Jesus is present with us in the midst of it all. And when we, like Mary and Martha, meet him there, our grief will be transformed, redeemed. Our tears are the place where God meets us. It is here that Christ invites us to be co-workers in the new creation. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. This week, Jesus welcomed Tina, his beloved, into his arms of love. And while we await the new heavens and the new earth, while we await the resurrection of the body, we also rest in the assurance, blessed assurance, that in Jesus, the light of new creation has already dawned. And so we give thanks. We give thanks to God for Tina, for her life, for the love and grace she embodied, for the one who lived as she prayed, who lived a life of simplicity and steadfastness, generosity and fierce self-giving love. We give thanks for what she taught us, for the life of faithfulness she modeled, and for the hope of resurrection and new life. And so today may we go and do likewise. And may we go hand in hand with the one who Tina loved, the very same Jesus who meets us here in this moment and calls each of us, you, me, all of us, by name.